Welcome back to Dom's Roundtable, my friends. We've got a lot to cover today with 35 important tips and things you may not yet know about Monster Hunter Wilds. So enough with the intro, let's get straight into it. Oh, and make sure you pull up your notepad because there's a lot of hidden information here, so I can almost guarantee that you're going to learn something here today, even as the most experienced veteran. First up, wishlisting is a mechanic that's taught to you right at the beginning of the game, but you really don't need it until you are deep into the high ranks, so it is easy to forget about. And the endgame loop primarily revolves around finding the right monsters to hunt that will optimize your equipment. Therefore, make sure that you're always wishlisting items. But this isn't just because it will tell you once an item is ready to craft. It has an even more powerful feature in that it will highlight monsters in an area that will help you to obtain these wishlisted items. Next up, when riding your Seikret, if you hold the right trigger whilst pressing left or right, you will actually perform a drift. And if you get good at timing this and don't hold it for too long and then release during a hard turn, you'll even get a speed boost. Basically, what I'm saying is Monster Hunter is actually Mario Kart, and the monsters are just optional extras. The next tip is to not neglect side missions, especially in high ranks, because they will grant you loads of valuable rewards and usually end in a hunt, which will grant you even more experience just for completing it, plus the experience for completing the mission as well on top. So side missions are a very valuable way to net yourself a lot of rewards and a lot of experience really quickly. Next up, something I advise you do early on is add pause game into your quick wheel, as this will allow you to pause the game instantly. Obviously you can only pause the game when playing single player, but this means that instead of having to faff around navigating menus and potentially being hit by the monster before you finally manage to reach the pause game button, you can literally just open up your quick wheel and flick pause, which will pause the game instantly. Next up, if you capture thunderbugs, you will actually gain a free shock trap, which you can then place normally just as you would had you crafted it. Tip number 6 is that most of your end game backup weapons, so your secondary, are most likely to be Artian weapons, so make sure you do go into Artian drop hunts to get special materials to upgrade these weapons, or you're effectively only going to be running with half an arsenal. For tip number 7, in high ranks, you can press square or X if you're using an Xbox controller to open the environment overview, which will show you a list of all monsters in the area. Then if you press the left shoulder button, so LB or L1, this will open a more in-depth overview timetable of the monsters that will be coming up in the area and the timing for upsurges in various resources and endemic life. So make sure you keep track of this so you know exactly where you should be going and when. Before we move into the next section, let me thank our sponsor for this video, War Robots Frontiers, which launched on March 4th on all platforms. It's free to play, so click the link in the description to try it out and claim your free rewards. War Robots Frontiers is a multiplayer mech shooter where you can customize your robots, squad up with other pilots online, and do battle across the stars. Just a few key features include extensive customization of the many classes available to play from day one, including adding modules and skills to your arsenal. You can then engage in 6v6 tactical combat using squad tactics such as ambushes and flanking to outwit your opponents, and then declare devastating charges across 3 different game modes and 4 detailed maps, all available at launch. There's even more content coming shortly after launch with unique cosmetics, battle gear, and even a brand new war robot, Cyclops, all available in the Under the Wire Battle Pass out on March 11th. War Robots Frontiers marks a bold new step for an already well-established franchise with over 250 million fans across the world. So if you'd like to join and give it a go today, make sure you click the link in the description so you can sign up and claim your free rewards. The next tip is to never neglect the power of optimal status recovery. This is something that is put in one of your original wheels as default right at the beginning of the game, and never ever get rid of it. Quite a few monsters inflict various status effects on you, and rather than needing all of these different recovery materials on your quick wheel individually, just equip optimal status recovery and the game will then auto-select whichever item you need to cure your current ailment. Technically, if you really want to min-max, it's not going to pick the most efficient one 100% of the time if you do have multiple items that can cure the same ailment, but for most players, optimal status recovery is so much better and easier than juggling the different recovery items yourself. Next up, if you are using a weapon with a charge gauge, then I advise adding a training barrel to all of your camps. This way, if a hunt takes you past one of your camp tents, you can use that barrel to top off your charge gauge and keep it active. And this way, when you do catch up with the monster again, you can go in all guns blazing, fully charged and ready to go. Next up, this tip is especially potent if you are using quick weapons that can snipe wounds fast. If you pay close attention to certain enemies' attacks, you'll see that some of them create a red glow when they perform certain special attacks. It doesn't last long, so you need to be quick and you need to snipe this area fast with a focus shot. This is a free focus strike that will reopen a wound. As an example, a dragon's mouth will have this red glow after using a breath attack, and if you hit it quickly, you'll reopen old wounds for extra damage and extra materials. For tip 11, if you are using a stamina heavy weapon like the bow or the dual blade, make sure you keep an eye out for Wiggly Litchi. Around the world you will see this item, and they will actually give you a buff that drastically lowers the drain rate of your stamina. And if you want to take this one step further, you could even equip Mushroom Mancer on your equipment, which will allow you to eat mushrooms, and specifically eating Devil's Blight will also give you that stamina buff. Number 12 is to not neglect your item loadouts. Make sure you have a bunch of loadouts saved for various situations, and then after a quest you can go into your loadouts, select a loadout, and it will automatically restock all of your main items instantaneously, rather than you having to go through and manage every single item individually, which can add a lot of tedium at the end of quests. So spend them extra few minutes setting up your loadouts and you'll save yourself a lot of time in the long run. Next up, my friends, did you know that focus strikes can be activated in the air if you have used an action that puts you in the air? So if you are using a weapon that allows you to jump around and you have just done an attack that propels you into aerial combat, if you target a wound, you can prepare your focus attack in the air, which will allow you to target wounds that are usually harder to reach from the ground, such as on the back of larger monsters. The next tip is something that you definitely shouldn't be doing, and this is leaving a monster carcass alone for a while before you carve it. Did you know it can turn rotten? And this doesn't benefit you much. You will still get some materials from it, but it's definitely worth noting to loot ASAP or the monster carcass can go off. And it does appear that that will reduce the materials you get from the monster, or if you leave it for too long, you will just outright no longer be able to carve it. Next up, during combat, you will notice that your Palico and other allies sometimes remind you to loot things that drop off your enemies, and this isn't just to add atmosphere. If you do enough damage to a certain area of a monster and break apart, they can drop heavy types of Slinger ammo that you definitely want to pick up and use throughout the fight, because these are very powerful free damage items. Tip number 16 is to make the most of a very underutilized item, the Gilley Mantle. If you equip it during combat, it will make you disappear from sight and give you an opportunity to do a sneak attack even in the middle of fight. And smoke bombs will also do a similar thing. And obviously, if you have something like the ambush skill equipped, where you get a 15% attack bonus when successfully completing a sneak attack, this is something you want to be doing frequently. Next up, each apex predator has a unique mechanic and a way to counter it. And obviously, as more and more monsters get added to the game, this list will expand. But just to give you a couple of examples, the Ray Dow has lightning on the floor, but if you use your Slinger on a grounding stone on the ground, it will remove the electrical current from the ground's surface. And depending on the arena you're fighting in, you can always use the environment to your advantage as well, so look for things like huge pillars hanging from the sky that you can pull down onto the monster's head for massive damage. Another example, the Duna has a massive wave where it jumps into the air and then goes into its lair underwater. But there are 2 ruins you can target with your Slinger, and you can pull them down onto the monster as it's swimming past, cancelling its tidal wave attack and forcing it to shore. Tip number 18, with your weapon drawn, you can partially run up vertical walls to complete an aerial attack. So for example, with the gun lance, you can swing and reload at the same time whilst jumping off a vertical edge, and this can also be combined with a ground attack. and this can be done to grapple monsters easier and also combined with aerial attacks. Talking of mounting monsters, the next two tips are all about mounting monsters. So when you have mounted a monster, you should move around to every available spot and create a weak spot so that there will be a multitude of places you can target with your focus strikes for massive damage. And also tip 20, when mounted, if they do try and get you off, instead of just bracing, just move to a different part of the monster and this will stop you falling off so you can stay mounted for longer and create more weak spots. Next up, if you are using an elemental weapon and this is the primary focus of your damage, then the elemental absorption skill is kind of redundant, as whenever you take elemental damage, it will boost your own weapon's element and increase your defense against that damage type. So you can switch out this skill for something more applicable based on your current setup and the monster you're fighting. Now for a few environmental based tips. You can use your Slinger shot on grey coral structures, which will cause an explosion dealing damage to nearby enemies, and if it hits another piece of coral, it will cause a chain detonation. Tip 23 is to always remember to use environmental counters against enemies. For example, flash pods are great against flying monsters, as they can take them down from the skies quite quickly and allow you to wail on them. And screamer pods are great for burrowing monsters, and using these on monsters who change location frequently can interrupt their pathing, giving you an extra chance to attack. And the next environmental tip, tip 24, it is easier to use environmental hazards if you have a weapon that stuns or sleeps your target, because you can lock it in place and position it where you want it to be positioned while you drop something on its head or explode a barrel, for instance. Tip number 25, some weapon-based dodges can actually bypass monster roars, therefore removing the need to skill into earplugs, and this can give you an extra couple of seconds of damage because the bosses roar for quite a while. Two examples for you are the longsword with foresight slash and the bow with the charging sidestep. Get used to learning bosses' attack patterns, get used to telegraphing when they are going to roar, and use these attacks to bypass the roar, and you can just continue to wail on them whilst they're roaring at you. Tip number 26, each armor set has an alpha and a beta set. The alpha set tends to have more perks but less decoration slots, whereas the beta is quite the opposite. More decoration slots but less equipment slots. So the alpha sets tend to be more useful initially when you don't have many decorations, but then once you can craft high level beta armor and you've gathered lots of decorations and you want to min-max to optimize your build, you can switch out to this with loads and loads of decorations. Tip number 27. Did you know that if you rest at a tent or interact with a portable grill, it allows you to change the time of day and the weather? But please note this will refresh monsters and active investigations. And you can use this to tailor the weather that you want. For instance, you can make it stormy if you want that bad weather mechanic that we talked about in a previous video. Tip number 28. If you place a barrel next to a sleeping monster, your Palico may also put a barrel down as well, which not only is super cute, but you can actually move his barrel and throw it at yours, causing a massive explosion. Or alternatively, you can retrieve your barrel back and just explode the Palico's barrel, therefore you have just gained a completely free explosive barrel use. And if you didn't know, if you hold it in your hand, you can release it and it will roll. So if going downhill, you can roll it into a monster, causing explosive damage and keeping you out of harm's way. Next up, similarly to pause game and the quick recovery, I suggest you slot your Whetstone into your quick wheel, because if you didn't know, using it in the normal way will stow your weapon first. So you will go and get your item, then you will take your weapon back out again to sharpen it. Whereas if you use the quick wheel or the quick command, you don't stow your weapon and you will sharpen it immediately, which obviously is far quicker. Tip number 30 is to not neglect autocraft. Turn on autocraft so that if you have the items in your inventory, it will immediately craft the item for you once you have the materials necessary. You can turn this on and off for the items that you do and don't want it to create in your crafting list to prevent resources from being wasted on items that you don't use or need. So again, just like setting up your loadouts, take some time to tailor this and it's going to make things so much quicker for you in the long run. Tip number 31, if you find your maximum stamina is decreasing and you don't know why, because you have no debuffs on you and you're still under the effects of your previous meal, in fact, you're just getting hungry. Even though your meal may last upwards of 50 minutes, you will start getting hungry after around 20 to 30. So make sure you always have some rations on hand and eat regularly to stop that hunger from increasing and your stamina from reducing. Next up, as you progress through high ranks, at certain points you will unlock the Palico side quest lines. Do not neglect these. It will unlock some incredibly powerful skills for your furry feline friend, including the ability to revive you, which is absolutely huge because it effectively gives you an extra cart for free. Tip number 33 is especially useful for returning players because if you've already got thousands of hours in Monster Hunter, it's easy to neglect new mechanics. Please do not forget about your charms. Once maxed out, they will grant you an entire max level skill, freeing up your armor set to be used to focus on even more skills. Tip number 34 is to change your weapon attack power display setting to without coefficient. This is going to give you a more true reflection of damage numbers and make it easier to determine whether a weapon is a damage upgrade or not, which is especially helpful when viewing two completely different weapon types with wildly varying speeds, like for instance the light bowgun versus the greatsword. Please note this obviously won't take into account things like element and affinity. You're still going to have to use your brain a little bit. And for the final tip for this video, you are going to be spending 95% of your time in combat in focus mode. It is so important in wilds, so do yourself a favor, go into the settings and set it to toggle instead of hold. This means you've got one less button to have to worry about in combat. Thank you for watching, my friends, and don't forget to check out War Robots Frontiers today using my link below in the pinned comment and the description. Hopefully at least a few of these 35 tips have helped you become an even better player than I know you already were in Monster Hunter Wilds. And with that, my friends, all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.